Julian stared at the confetti of paper in the shredder bin, a chaotic mix of white and pale blue strips, each one a neat, machine-cut sliver of his life. His life's work, reduced to meaningless, festive-looking trash. He reached in, his hand hovering over the delicate pile, feeling a strange absence of heat, of anger. There was only a profound, hollow coldness. On the wall opposite his desk, a framed print of Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man seemed to mock him with its perfect, measured proportions. Order and chaos contained in one small, sterile home office. His wife, Amelia, stood in the doorway, a half-empty mug of coffee in her hand. She gestured toward the bin with it, a flicker of triumphant practicality in her eyes. "I finally did it," she announced, her voice bright, almost cheerful. "I cleared out all that clutter from your shelf. Years of it. All those worthless papers. Don't you feel better? More organized?" Worthless papers. He let the phrase settle in the quiet space between them. For 5 years, those papers, housed in a worn brown leather folder, had been the silent third occupant of their marriage. To her, they were a symbol of his failure, a collection of diagrams, chemical formulas, and dense paragraphs of text that represented a career he'd abandoned for a dream she couldn't comprehend. They were an embarrassing testament to a man who, in her family's eyes, refused to grow up and get a real job. Julian slowly looked from the shredded remains of his work to his wife's expectant face. She was waiting for praise, for gratitude for her act of domestic efficiency. What she didn't know, what she could never have conceived, was that she had just performed a ceremonial execution. She had just destroyed the physical copies of a patent portfolio for a new class of synthetic biologics. A portfolio that 48 hours ago had received a final acquisition offer from a global pharmaceutical giant. An offer worth $45 million. The fallout from that single, arrogant act of tidying up would not just unravel her world, but the entire gilded universe of her family, which orbited a son of wealth and status he had never been allowed to approach. It was an act born of shame, and it would birth a consequence she could never have imagined. Thank you for joining us for this story. We know you're going to feel every moment of this journey, from the frustration to the final, satisfying release. If you enjoy stories where the underestimated find their voice, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you never miss what's coming next. And we'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. Now let's return to the quiet office where a storm was gathering. Julian's first instinct was not to scream. It was not to rage or to accuse. It was a strange, dispassionate curiosity. He looked at Amelia, truly looked at her, and saw a stranger. He saw the subtle lines of disdain around her mouth, the same ones that appeared whenever her brother Marcus made a joke at his expense. He saw the flicker of impatience in her eyes, the same flicker that ignited when her father Richard lectured him on the importance of a respectable career path. For years, he had interpreted these expressions as byproducts of her frustration, a temporary reflection of her family's pervasive influence. Now he saw them as fundamental parts of her. She was not just enabling their judgment, she was a vessel for it. "You threw them away," he said. The statement was flat, devoid of emotion. It was the voice of a scientist noting an observation. Amelia's smile faltered, replaced by a defensive edge. "I didn't just throw them away, Julian. I shredded them. For security, you never know. But honestly, it was just clutter. Piles of old research for a project you haven't touched in years. It was time to move on. My father said just last week that he'd be happy to—" "To what?" Julian interrupted, his voice still unnervingly calm. "Happy to give me a job in his company's mailroom? I believe that was the offer. A chance to learn the business from the ground up at 36 years old." The memory of that dinner just 3 days prior was still a fresh wound. It had been at her parents' house, a sprawling, minimalist mansion that felt more like a modern art museum than a home. Everything was glass and steel and stark white walls, a sterile environment for sterile conversations. Julian had always felt like a microbe under a microscope in that house. Richard, her father, a man whose tailored suits cost more than Julian's monthly mortgage, had leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of obscenely expensive red wine. "Julian," he had begun, the way a king might address a court jester. "Amelia tells me you're still tinkering." The word was deployed with surgical precision, designed to diminish and patronize. Marcus, Amelia's brother, had snickered into his napkin. He was a junior partner at a private equity firm, a man who produced nothing but moved money around, yet carried himself with the gravitas of a nation builder. "I'm working, Richard," Julian had replied, his gaze steady. He had learned long ago that reacting with anger was a fatal mistake in this family. They fed on it. Calm was the only shield. "Working on what exactly?" Marcus chimed in, his tone dripping with false sincerity. "Still chasing that perpetual motion machine? Or have you moved on to alchemy? Turning lead into gold would be a useful skill in this economy." The table laughed. Not just Marcus and Richard, but Eleanor, Amelia's mother, a woman whose face was a smooth, unmoving mask of cosmetic perfection. And Amelia had laughed too, a small, tight sound, a desperate signal of allegiance to her tribe. She had glanced at Julian, a fleeting apology in her eyes, but she had not defended him. She never did. She was the silent enabler, the bridge he had thought connected their two worlds, but who in reality was simply a gatekeeper for hers. "It's a complex project," Julian had said simply, turning his attention back to his plate. It was then that Richard made his grand, magnanimous offer. "Look, son, I admire persistence, but there comes a time when a man has to face reality. Your savings can't last forever. The guest house you're living in is ours after all. It's time to think about Amelia's future, about providing for her in a way she's accustomed to. I have an opening in the mailroom at Sterling Corp. It's a start, a foot in the door. Show some humility, learn the ropes." The humiliation was the point. The offer was not an act of kindness. It was a power play, a way to formally subordinate him, to bring him under Richard's thumb, and finally extinguish the last embers of his independent ambition. He was to be a charity case, a project for the family to manage. Now, standing in his office, the ghost of that conversation hung in the air. Amelia's act of shredding his papers was the physical manifestation of her father's offer. It was a declaration: your dream is over. It's time to accept your place. "My father is just trying to help, Julian," Amelia said, her voice softening now, sensing she had misstepped. "We're all just trying to help. We're worried about you. You're isolated in here all day with these things." She looked at the bin again, a wave of disgust passing over her face. "It's not healthy." Julian felt a laugh bubble up inside him, a cold, bitter thing. Healthy. He thought of the years of 17-hour days, the failed experiments, the breakthroughs at 3 a.m. He thought of the quiet joy of solving a problem that had stumped him for months, the elegant beauty of a perfectly balanced equation. He thought of the sacrifices, the social events missed, the vacations declined. He had poured his soul into the contents of that bin. He had built a cathedral of knowledge, and she had swept it up like dust. He walked over to his desk and sat down. His computer was asleep. With a click of the mouse, the screen blinked to life. It showed a secure digital vault, the login screen pristine and waiting. Everything of value, the finalized data, the signed digital agreements, the correspondence with the patent office, the acquisition offer from Omnifarm, was in there. The papers in the folder had been his working copies, his thinking space. They were sentimental, yes. They were the physical proof of his labor, but they were not, in the strictest sense, irreplaceable. And that was the most devastating part. Her act was purely symbolic. She had not destroyed the value of his work, for she had no power to do so. She had only destroyed his belief that she could ever understand it. She had shredded the last fraying thread of his respect for her. "Thank you for organizing, Amelia," Julian said, his voice a perfect imitation of sincerity. He turned to his monitor. "I feel much better now, more clear." Amelia, hearing only the words and not the abyss beneath them, smiled, relieved. "I knew you would. See, sometimes you just need a little push." She took a sip of her coffee, the crisis averted in her mind. "Now, about my father's offer, will you at least think about it?" Julian looked at the login screen for the vault, the name Omnifarm glowing softly in his mind. $45 million, a number so large it felt like a fiction. He thought of Richard's condescending offer, of Marcus's sneering jokes, of his wife's proud, ignorant smile. "Oh yes," Julian said, a strange, calm energy beginning to fill the void inside him. "I'm going to think about it very, very carefully." He was no longer a husband defending his hobby. He was a strategist, and the board had just been set. The game had begun. The days following the shredding were marked by a surreal tranquility. Julian moved through his life with a quiet, detached precision that Amelia mistook for acquiescence. She believed he was finally succumbing to the gravity of her family's expectations, that his tinkering phase was over, and he was now contemplating the grim reality of a respectable, mediocre life as defined by them. She saw his long hours in the office not as continued work, but as a kind of mourning for his failed ambitions. In her mind, she had performed a painful but necessary surgery, amputating a gangrenous dream to save the patient. Julian did nothing to disabuse her of this notion. He was polite, attentive even. He made dinner. He asked about her day at the art gallery she managed, a gallery funded, of course, by her father. He listened to her recount the petty dramas of the local art scene with a focused interest he had never feigned before. He was studying her the way he had once studied cellular structures under a microscope. He was mapping the intricate architecture of her values, her fears, her loyalties. He saw how deeply the fear of social demotion was embedded in her psyche. Her family's wealth was not just a resource, it was their identity. The thought of living without that golden armor was, to her, a fate worse than death. He spent his days in the office, the door closed. But he was not mourning. He was preparing. The acquisition by Omnifarm was a complex, multi-stage process. The initial offer had been accepted, but the finalization involved a labyrinth of legal and financial procedures. His primary contact was a woman named Evelyn Reed, the CEO of Omnifarm. She was a legend in the biotech world, a formidable intellect with a reputation for ruthless efficiency and unimpeachable integrity. Julian had spoken with her over secure video calls for months, and they had developed a rapport built on mutual respect for the science. She saw the genius in his work, the elegant, world-changing potential of it. She never once asked him about his background, his education, or his financial status. The work was all that mattered. He exchanged encrypted emails with Omnifarm's legal team, reviewing contracts that ran hundreds of pages long. He consulted with his own lawyer, a specialist in intellectual property law, whom he had retained years ago, paying him with funds from a small inheritance his grandmother had left him. This, too, was a secret he had kept. To his wife and her family, he was living off dwindling savings, a ticking clock counting down to his inevitable surrender. The truth was, his grandmother's legacy had been his seed funding, the silent investment that had allowed him to pursue his work without compromise. The worn leather folder, now gone, had been a totem. In moments of doubt, he would run his hand over its supple, scarred surface. It was a tangible link to his past, to the genesis of his ideas. Inside, the papers were a chaotic jumble to the untrained eye. Notes scribbled in margins, coffee-stained pages, formulas circled and crossed out. But to Julian, it was a map of his mind. Each annotation was a memory, a moment of frustration or a flash of inspiration. Losing it was like losing a part of his memory. But the memory was not the thing itself. The work was real. It was secure. It was about to change everything. One evening, about a week after the shredding, Amelia came into his office. The shredder bin was gone, replaced by a sleek, minimalist wastebasket. The shelf where the folder had sat was now home to a single, artfully placed succulent. Her touch was everywhere, erasing him, replacing his comfortable chaos with her sterile order. "Marcus is having a few people over for drinks tomorrow night," she said, leaning against the doorframe, "to celebrate his promotion. He's a full partner now." Her voice was laced with a pride that grated on Julian's nerves. Marcus's work consisted of leveraging debt and dismantling companies for profit. He was a vulture in a bespoke suit. "That's nice for him," Julian said, not looking up from his screen, where he was reviewing a wire transfer instruction for the initial escrow payment. "He wants us to be there. Both of us." There was a pleading note in her voice. "Please, Julian, I know things have been tense, but this is important to me. It's important for my family to see that we're a team, that you're trying. The word was a euphemism for conforming. He was supposed to show up, absorb the inevitable insults with a placid smile, and demonstrate his willingness to be assimilated into their world. It was a loyalty test. "And what will I say when Richard asks if I've accepted his generous offer to sort mail?" Julian asked, his voice still mild. Amelia flinched. "Don't be like that. He's just trying to look out for us. He sees you're unhappy, and he wants to give you a purpose." "A purpose," Julian repeated softly. He looked up from the screen, his eyes meeting hers. For a moment, he felt the urge to show her, to turn the monitor and let her see the Omnifarm logo, the astronomical figures, the name Evelyn Reed. He wanted to see the shock, the confusion, the dawning, horrified realization. But the timing was wrong. A premature revelation would be messy, emotional. His plan required precision. It required a stage, an audience, and a perfectly timed denouement. This was not a domestic squabble. This was a strategic demolition. "All right," he said, surprising her. "We'll go." Her face flooded with relief. "Oh, thank you, Julian. It will mean so much to me. Just be nice, please, for me." "I'm always nice," he said. And it was true. His niceness had been mistaken for weakness for years. They had no idea that beneath the calm exterior, a different kind of man had been forged. A man who understood that true power wasn't loud. It was silent, patient, and absolute. He would go to the party. He would play his role one last time. He would let them have their moment of triumph, their final, condescending jokes. He would absorb it all, every last drop of their arrogance. He would add it to the list of grievances he was compiling in his mind, a cold, methodical accounting of every slight, every insult, every act of disrespect. The party would be the final entry. After that, the accounting would be settled. He thought of the shredded paper again. It had been an act of desecration. But in a way, she had done him a favor. She had severed his final emotional attachment to the past. She had liberated him from any lingering obligation to be the man she wanted him to be. She had cleared the way for the man he was about to become. He had been living a double life, the failed dreamer in her eyes, and the revolutionary scientist in reality. Soon, those two lives would converge in a spectacular, devastating collision. The party at Marcus's apartment was exactly the ordeal Julian had anticipated. Marcus lived in a penthouse in the city's most aggressively modern high-rise, a glass box in the sky with panoramic views of the urban sprawl. The decor was a monument to bachelorhood and unearned confidence. Oversized leather couches, a massive television screen displaying a muted sports game, and a bar stocked with ostentatiously expensive liquors. The guests were all cut from the same cloth as Marcus. Young, sharp-suited men and women who talked loudly about stock options, weekend trips to Aspen, and the soul-crushing inadequacy of their six-figure bonuses. Julian, in his simple dark sweater and slacks, was an anomaly, a drab bird that had accidentally flown into a cage of peacocks. Amelia, on the other hand, thrived. Dressed in a shimmering cocktail dress, she moved through the crowd with an easy grace, her laughter bright and frequent. She was home. From the moment they arrived, Julian became the designated target for the family's particular brand of humor. Marcus greeted him with a hearty slap on the back that was more of a blow than a welcome. "Julian, glad you could make it. Took a break from curing the common cold, did you?" He winked at a nearby group, who chuckled obligingly. "Everyone, this is my brother-in-law, Julian. He's our resident genius, very mysterious. Works on top-secret projects from his garage." "It's a guest house, actually," Julian corrected him mildly, taking a glass of sparkling water from a passing waiter. "Guest house, garage, secret volcano lair, what's the difference?" Marcus retorted, his grin wide. "The point is, we never know what he's up to, but we're all hoping it involves a get-rich-quick scheme we can get in on. Right, Dad?" Richard, holding court by the floor-to-ceiling windows, turned his attention to Julian. He held a glass of whiskey that was almost certainly older than Julian. "An honest day's work is the only get-rich-quick scheme I've ever believed in, Marcus," he said, his eyes settling on Julian with paternalistic disappointment. Something Julian is hopefully beginning to appreciate. "Have you given any more thought to my offer, son? The mailroom is waiting. It builds character." "I'm still considering all my options," Julian replied, his voice even. He took a slow sip of his water, his gaze sweeping over the room. He felt like an anthropologist observing a primitive tribe, one whose social rituals revolved around displays of dominance and the ritual humiliation of outsiders. Eleanor, Amelia's mother, glided over to them. She placed a cool, bony hand on Julian's arm. Her smile didn't reach her eyes, which were busy scanning the room for more important guests. "Julian, dear, you're looking a little thin. Are you eating properly? I do hope all this thinking isn't taking too much of a toll." Her concern was a beautifully crafted insult, implying he was withering away from the strain of his own uselessness. "I'm fine, Eleanor. Thank you for asking," he said. He found a relatively quiet corner and tried to become part of the minimalist furniture. But they were relentless. Throughout the evening, one of them would make a point of bringing someone over to introduce him, always with a backhanded compliment attached. "This is Julian. He's the quiet one in the family. Still waters run deep, they say." Julian here is an independent researcher, very independent, as in independently poor. This one from a cousin got a big laugh. Amelia heard it all. Each time she would shoot him a look, a complex cocktail of pity, embarrassment, and a silent plea for him to endure it. She was a hostage to their approval, and he was the price of her ransom. At one point she came over to him, her face flushed with champagne and social success. "Are you okay?" she whispered, her hand briefly touching his. "I'm enjoying the anthropological study," he said dryly. She sighed, frustrated. "Can't you just try to fit in? For one night, talk to people, network. Marcus's friends are very influential." "And what would I talk to them about?" he asked. "The molecular structure of protein folding inhibitors? I doubt that would compete with their discussion about the new Porsche model." "You're impossible," she hissed, and walked away, back to the warmth of the crowd, leaving him in the cold. The final, most exquisite humiliation came near the end of the night. Marcus, flushed with alcohol and success, stood on a chair to make a toast. He thanked everyone for coming, thanked his father for his guidance, and then his eyes found Julian. And I want to give a special shout out to my brother-in-law, Julian, he said, raising his glass. The room quieted, turning to look at Julian. He's a constant reminder to all of us of the importance of dreaming. Because while we're all out here, in the real world, making deals and building careers, Julian is at home, dreaming big. He's probably dreaming right now. So let's raise a glass to the dreamers. They may not pay the bills, but they certainly keep things interesting. The room erupted in a mixture of laughter and applause. It was a perfectly executed social assassination, painting him as a pathetic, childish figure, an object of pity and amusement. Julian stood still, his glass of water in his hand. He looked at Marcus, then at Richard, who was smiling proudly at his son. He looked at Eleanor, who was clapping delicately, and finally he looked at Amelia. She was clapping too, a strained, painful smile plastered on her face. She was applauding his degradation. In that moment, something inside Julian shifted. The patient observer, the strategist, the scientist, they all receded, and for a fleeting second, a pure, cold anger took their place. But he didn't let it show. He simply raised his glass of water in a small, acknowledging gesture to Marcus. He held their gazes one by one. He let them see his calm. He wanted them to remember this moment. He wanted them to remember his placid face when their world came crashing down. He knew then that a simple revelation of his wealth would not be enough. That would just be a new kind of power play, a reversal of the same shallow game they were playing. No, what he had to do was more fundamental. He had to hold up a mirror to them. He had to make them see not that he was rich, but that they were poor. Poor in character, poor in empathy, poor in everything that truly mattered. On the drive home, the silence in the car was thick and heavy. Amelia stared out the window, the city lights flashing across her face. Julian drove with a steady, focused calm. "That was awful," she finally said, her voice small. "I'm sorry, Julian. Marcus can be such a jerk when he's been drinking." "He's a jerk when he's sober too," Julian replied, his tone neutral. "The alcohol just removes the filter. It's just his way. He doesn't mean anything by it." "He means everything by it, Amelia, and you know it." He glanced at her. "You clapped." She recoiled as if struck. "What was I supposed to do? Make a scene? Humiliate my own brother at his party?" "So you chose to humiliate your husband instead," he stated. "It wasn't an accusation. It was a fact." "That's not fair. You don't understand my family. You don't understand the pressure." "Oh, I understand it perfectly," Julian said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I understand it better than you can possibly imagine." He pulled into the driveway of the guest house. He turned off the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening. The party was the last piece of data he needed. The experiment was complete. The conclusion was clear. Now all that was left was to publish the results. He got out of the car without another word, leaving Amelia alone in the dark, a chasm opening between them that she was only just beginning to perceive. He went into his office, closed the door, and began to write an email. The subject line was simple: family meeting. The email Julian sent was a masterpiece of benign ambiguity. He proposed a meeting at the main house, Richard and Eleanor's sterile mansion, in 2 days' time. He framed it as an opportunity to discuss his future and formally respond to Richard's generous offer, and to provide clarity on his financial situation to put everyone's minds at ease. The family's interpretation of this was immediate and unanimous. Julian was finally surrendering. The party must have been the final straw, the event that shattered his foolish pride. He was coming, hat in hand, to beg for the mailroom job, and most likely for a loan. Marcus called Amelia the moment he read the email. Julian, sitting in his office, could hear her side of the conversation through the thin walls of the guest house. "Yes, I saw it. I know, it's about time." No, I didn't push him, not really. I think he just finally saw the light. Yes, Dad's offer was very generous. Of course we'll be there. Her voice was a mixture of relief and a kind of weary triumph. She had won. Her husband was finally coming to heel. Julian felt a pang of something that might have been pity, but it was faint, a distant echo from a life that no longer felt like his. He was watching a play, and he was the only one who had read the final act. He spent the next 48 hours in a state of hyper-focused calm, the quiet before the storm. He went for long walks, the crisp autumn air clearing his head. He methodically organized his digital files, creating a separate, encrypted drive with a curated selection of documents. The final, signed acquisition agreement with Omnifarm, the official valuation report from an independent auditor, a summary of the patent's applications in layman's terms, and finally, a detailed financial statement of the initial escrow payment that had been deposited into a holding account 2 days ago. He named the drive The Mirror. He also made a phone call to Evelyn Reed. "Evelyn," he said, his voice warm. "Julian Vance." "Julian." "Good to hear your voice." Her reply was crisp and businesslike, yet not unkind. "Is everything all right with the final paperwork? My legal team tells me we're on track for the official announcement on Monday." "Everything is perfect," he assured her. "I have a slightly unusual request, however." "I'm listening." "I'm having a meeting with my wife's family in 2 days, at 4 p.m. Pacific time. There are some complex family dynamics at play regarding my work. It would be incredibly helpful, for the sake of clarity, if you could join via a brief video call at precisely 4:30 p.m. I'll send you a secure link." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Julian could picture her, sitting in her corner office overlooking the San Francisco Bay, her sharp mind processing the subtext. She was a brilliant reader of people. "Family dynamics," she repeated, a hint of understanding in her tone. "I see. You need a third-party validation. You need the mountain to come to Muhammad, so to speak." "Something like that," Julian admitted. "Consider it done," she said without hesitation. "My executive assistant will clear my schedule. 4:30 p.m. Pacific. I'll be there. Is there anything specific you need me to say or do?" "Just be yourself," Julian said. "And perhaps have the final acquisition sum handy. That should be more than sufficient." A low chuckle came through the phone. "Understood. Good luck with your meeting, Julian, though I suspect you don't need it." When the day of the meeting arrived, Julian dressed with deliberate care. He chose not a suit, which would have been a concession to their world, but a simple, well-fitting charcoal gray cashmere sweater, dark trousers, and the same understated leather shoes he always wore. He looked neat, respectable, but not wealthy. He was a blank canvas onto which they could project all their assumptions. Amelia was a nervous wreck. She changed her outfit 3 times, finally settling on a conservative navy blue dress. "How do I look?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "You look fine, Amelia," he said. "What are you going to say?" "Please, Julian, don't be confrontational. Just be humble. Thank my father for his offer, even if you don't take it. Show them you respect him." "Respect is earned, not demanded," Julian said softly. He picked up his laptop bag. Inside was the laptop and the encrypted drive, the mirror. It felt as heavy as a stone tablet. "Don't worry, I will be perfectly clear. Everyone will leave the meeting with a full understanding of the situation." They drove to the main house in a silence even more profound than the one after the party. The air was thick with unspoken expectations. As Julian pulled up the long gravel driveway to the imposing glass and steel structure, he felt no intimidation. He felt nothing at all but a cold, clear sense of purpose. He was not here to fight. He was here to correct a data error. He was here to balance the equation. The house didn't look like a home, it looked like a laboratory, and he was about to conduct his final, decisive experiment. They entered the house. Richard, Eleanor and Marcus were waiting for them in the cavernous living room. They were arranged on a massive white sofa like a royal family holding court. Richard sat in the center, flanked by his wife and son. A single, hardback chair had been placed opposite the sofa, about 10 feet away. It was an interrogation setup. Julian was the subject, the supplicant. "Julian, Amelia," Richard said, his voice booming in the echoing space. He did not get up. "Thank you for coming. Please, Julian, have a seat." He gestured to the lone chair. Julian ignored the chair. He walked over to the large marble coffee table that separated the sofa from the rest of the room and placed his laptop on it. He remained standing. Amelia, looking uncertain, hovered for a moment before scurrying to the far end of the sofa, seating herself as far from Julian as possible. A clear, physical statement of her allegiance. Marcus smirked. "Decided to stand? Bold choice. Makes for a quicker getaway, I suppose." "I'm fine right here," Julian said calmly. He looked at the three of them, their faces a mixture of smugness, impatience, and condescending pity. They were so confident in their power, so certain of the script for the afternoon. "Well," Richard began, leaning forward, his hands clasped. "Let's get to it. Your email was rather dramatic. You said you wanted to discuss your future. I assume that means you've come to your senses. The position in the mailroom is still available, though I can't promise it will be for long. It's a matter of humility, Julian. Are you ready to be humble?" Julian looked at Richard, this man who measured the worth of another human being by their job title and bank balance. He thought of the years of quiet condescension, the endless, unsolicited advice, the casual dismissals of his life's passion. "Before we discuss your offer, Richard," Julian began, his voice calm and measured, filling the silent room, "I'd like to do what I said in my email. I'd like to provide some clarity. I feel there have been some misunderstandings about my work, about my financial situation, about my relationship with this family." He let the words hang in the air. Marcus shifted impatiently. "Clarity? Julian, it's all crystal clear. You're broke, you have no job, and you're living in our guest house. My father is offering you a lifeline. I suggest you grab it before you drown." Julian's gaze shifted to Marcus. "Thank you for that assessment, Marcus. It's a perfect example of the first misunderstanding I'd like to address. Let's call it the narrative of the failed dreamer. It's a story you've all been telling yourselves for a very long time. A story in which I am a foolish, pitiable character, chasing an impossible dream while my practical, successful wife and her brilliant family wait patiently for me to face reality." He began to pace slowly in front of the table, his movements deliberate. He was no longer a subject in an interrogation. He was a lecturer in his own hall. "This narrative has been very useful for you. It has allowed you to feel generous when you offer me a menial job. It has allowed you to feel witty when you make jokes at my expense. It has allowed you to feel superior." Richard's face began to harden. The condescending smile vanished, replaced by a stern frown. "What is the meaning of this, Julian? Are you here to insult us? After all we've done for you?" "Done for me?" Julian stopped pacing and turned to face him fully. This was the beginning of the list of grievances. "Let's talk about what you've done for me. You've consistently belittled my work, calling it a hobby or tinkering. You've questioned my intelligence, my ambition, and my ability to provide for my wife. A wife who, I might add, I have supported entirely for the past 5 years without a single dollar of your help. You have used every family gathering as an opportunity to publicly humiliate me, to reinforce my status as an outsider, a charity case." He then turned his gaze to Marcus. "You, Marcus, have been the most vocal. Independently poor was your latest, wasn't it? At your party, you've treated my life's work as a punchline, a source of amusement for your equally shallow friends. You, who produce nothing of value, who merely shift debt from one ledger to another, have presumed to judge the value of my contributions to the world. Finally, his eyes fell on Eleanor. And you, Eleanor, your weapon has been pity. The concerned questions about my health, the subtle implications that I am wasting my life. You have wrapped your disdain in a blanket of false concern, which is perhaps the most insidious form of contempt of all. A stunned silence filled the room. The three of them stared at him, their smug expressions replaced by shock and mounting anger. They had expected a supplicant, and instead they were facing an accuser. "How dare you?" Richard finally boomed, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. He started to rise from the sofa. "You come into my house, a house you live in for free." "The guest house is not free," Julian interrupted, his voice cutting through Richard's anger like a shard of ice. "It was part of Amelia's and my prenuptial agreement, which your own lawyers drafted. It was granted in exchange for my waiving any future claim on Amelia's inheritance or any assets acquired by her through her family. A legal document you seem to have forgotten. I have, in fact, upheld my end of that bargain perfectly." This legal detail struck Richard like a physical blow. He sank back onto the sofa, momentarily speechless. He had forgotten. In his narrative, it was an act of charity, not a contractual obligation. Amelia, who had been watching this unfold with wide, terrified eyes, finally found her voice. "Julian, stop! What are you doing? You're destroying everything." Julian turned to her, and for the first time his calm facade cracked just enough to reveal the profound, cold disappointment beneath. "Destroying what, Amelia? This arrangement? This charade where I absorb your family's contempt so you can continue to enjoy their approval? The part where you stand by and laugh and clap while they mock your husband?" His voice dropped, becoming intensely personal, meant only for her. "Or are we talking about what you destroyed? Let's talk about the folder, Amelia, the brown leather folder you took from my office. The worthless papers you so efficiently shredded to help me move on." Amelia paled. Marcus scoffed, rolling his eyes. "Oh, here we go. He's still upset about his little arts and crafts project. Julian, grow up. It was trash." "It was trash," Julian repeated, a strange, dangerous light in his eyes. He turned back to the coffee table and opened his laptop. The screen came to life, showing a simple desktop background. He inserted the encrypted flash drive, the mirror. A single folder icon appeared on the screen. "You're also certain about value," Julian said, his voice now a low, resonant hum. "You, Richard, value profit margins and market share. You, Marcus, value leveraged buyouts and hostile takeovers. You, Eleanor, value social standing and appearances. You measure the world in dollars and status. It's the only language you speak. So let me be fluent." He double-clicked the folder. A list of PDF documents appeared. He clicked on the first one. omnifarm_acquisition_final.pdf. "Those worthless papers," he said, his eyes fixed on Amelia, "were the working drafts, the physical ideation of a patent portfolio for a series of protein folding inhibitors that have the potential to revolutionize the treatment of several neurodegenerative diseases. It was my life's work. And 5 days ago, I accepted a final offer for the full acquisition of that portfolio." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the silent room. Marcus looked bored. Richard looked angry, and Amelia just looked confused. They still didn't understand. "An offer from whom?" Richard demanded. "Some little startup? Who would buy the scribbles of a man in a guest house?" Julian smiled. It was a cold, grim smile. "The offer was from Omnifarm." The name landed in the room with a palpable thud. Omnifarm was not some little startup. It was one of the largest and most respected pharmaceutical corporations in the world. A titan of the industry. Richard's company, Sterling Corp., was a minnow in comparison. Marcus's smirk finally wavered. He knew that name. Everyone knew that name. "You're lying," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. A seed of doubt had been planted. "Am I?" Julian said. He looked at his watch. It was 4:29 p.m. "You see, the problem with your worldview is that it's based entirely on superficial data. You judge me on my car, my clothes, my lack of a corner office. You never once thought to judge me on the quality of my mind or the content of my work. You saw a man you wanted to see, not the man who was actually there." He turned the laptop around so the screen faced them. The first page of the acquisition contract was visible, with the Omnifarm logo at the top, his name, Julian Vance, listed as the seller, and a long string of legalese. "This is the final agreement," he said, "but I know you don't like to read the fine print. You prefer the bottom line." He scrolled down, past pages and pages of text, until he reached the acquisitions and payment schedule. He highlighted a single number on the screen. "So let's talk about that bottom line. The worthless papers that Amelia shredded. The get-rich-quick scheme you all mocked. The final acquisition price was—" He paused, his gaze sweeping over their stunned faces. $45 million. The number hung in the air, an impossible, obscene figure that sucked all the oxygen out of the room. $45 million. For a moment, there was absolute silence, the kind of silence that follows a massive, unexpected explosion. Richard's face, which had been red with anger, was now ashen. Eleanor's perfectly composed face had slackened, her mouth slightly agape. Marcus stared at the screen, his eyes wide with disbelief, the color draining from his face. And Amelia just shook her head, a tiny, repetitive motion, as if she could physically deny the information her brain was receiving. "No," she whispered. "No, it's not possible. You're lying. It's a trick." Marcus was the first to find his voice, a strangled, incredulous laugh. $45 million? You're insane. You faked this document. This is the most pathetic, desperate thing you've ever done, Julian. Did you spend your last $100 on a forger? Richard, recovering slightly, seized on his son's explanation. "Marcus is right. This is a fantasy, a pathetic attempt to save face. You've finally lost your mind." Julian remained perfectly calm. He had anticipated this. Disbelief was the first stage of their reality collapsing. "You're right to be skeptical," he said, his voice maddeningly reasonable. "It is a rather large number, and you're correct. A document can be faked, which is why I thought it would be best to get a confirmation from the source." He looked at his watch. It was exactly 4:30 p.m. As if on cue, a soft chime emanated from his laptop. A notification window popped up on the screen. "Evelyn Reed is waiting to join the call." Julian clicked "Accept." A new window opened, and a woman's face appeared. She was in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes, elegantly styled silver hair, and an air of absolute, unshakable authority. She was sitting in an office with a breathtaking view of a bay and a famous red bridge in the background. She was the picture of power. Richard, Marcus, and Eleanor recognized that view. It was the view from the C-suite in San Francisco. "Julian," she said, her voice crisp and clear. "Am I on time?" "Perfectly, Evelyn. Thank you for joining us," Julian said warmly. He turned the laptop slightly so she had a better view of the family on the sofa. "Evelyn, I'd like you to meet my wife, Amelia, and her family, Richard, Eleanor, and Marcus." Evelyn Reed gave a polite, professional nod. Her eyes, however, were analytical, taking in the scene with a quick, discerning glance. She saw the palatial room, the expensive clothes, and the looks of utter shock on their faces. She understood immediately. "A pleasure to meet you all," she said. Richard stared at the screen, his mind struggling to process what was happening. He knew who Evelyn Reed was. Anyone in the corporate world did. She was a legend, the CEO of Omnifarm. He had seen her on the cover of Forbes and Fortune. She was in a different league, a different universe from his modest manufacturing company. "Ms. Reed," Richard stammered, his voice suddenly hoarse. This is an honor. "I'm Richard Sterling, CEO of Sterling Corp." He was trying to establish his own status, a desperate attempt to find his footing on ground that was rapidly turning to quicksand. Evelyn gave him a brief, dismissive smile. "Mr. Sterling, Julian asked me to join you to clear up any potential confusion regarding our recent acquisition." "I'm happy to do so. Our legal teams have just finalized the last details." She looked back at Julian. "Julian, the initial escrow transfer of $9 million was confirmed this morning. The funds are secure in the holding account. The remaining $36 million will be transferred in 2 installments upon the final handoff of the research data, as per our agreement." $9 million, $36 million. The numbers, spoken so casually by this titan of industry, were like hammer blows. They were real. This was all real. "I've also read the preliminary media statement our PR team has drafted for Monday's announcement," Evelyn continued, oblivious to the emotional carnage she was creating. "It rightly positions your work as one of the most significant breakthroughs in neurotherapeutic research in the last decade. We project the market value of the resulting treatments to be in the billions." "Frankly, Julian, we believe we got a bargain." Marcus made a small, choking sound. Billions. Bargain. The words didn't compute. The man they had mocked as a pathetic dreamer, the man they had offered a job in their mailroom, had just been told by one of the most powerful CEOs in the world that he had sold his hobby for a bargain at $45 million. Evelyn looked at her watch. "Now, if that's all, Julian, I have a call with our Tokyo office in 5 minutes. It was a pleasure to formally meet your family. We at Omnifarm are incredibly excited to have you on board for the transition. Your genius is going to change the world." With a final polite nod, her image vanished from the screen. The call was over. The silence that descended on the room was absolute. It was a vacuum, heavy and suffocating. The only sound was the quiet hum of Julian's laptop. He slowly closed the lid, the soft click echoing like a gunshot. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted, it had been annihilated. The confident, condescending family on the sofa had been reduced to 3 statues of disbelief and horror. Julian, the lone figure standing before them, now possessed a gravity that seemed to bend the very air around him. Amelia was the first to break. A low, guttural sob escaped her lips. It was the sound of a person's entire reality shattering at once. She looked at the shredded paper in her memory, the worthless papers she had destroyed with such smug satisfaction. She looked at Julian, this man she thought she knew, this stranger who held universes inside him that she had never bothered to look for. $45 million, she whispered, the words catching in her throat. Her mind was frantically trying to reconcile the image of her husband, the quiet, unassuming man she was ashamed of, with the figure described by Evelyn Reed, a genius who had just sold his dream for a fortune. Richard was next. He slumped back against the white cushions, all the fight gone out of him. The red in his face had been replaced by a sickly, gray pallor. He looked old. He looked small. His entire identity was built on his wealth and his position as the family patriarch, the provider, the man in charge. In the space of 5 minutes, Julian had eclipsed him so completely that he was now nothing more than a moderately successful, small-time businessman in the presence of true, world-changing wealth. His offer of a mailroom job now seemed like the pathetic gesture of a child offering a pebble to a king. A new, more terrifying thought began to form in his mind. His own company, Sterling Corp., had been struggling. He'd taken on too much debt to fund an expansion that was failing. He had been secretly hoping to ask Julian for a loan, a small one, once he had a real job. The irony was so bitter it tasted like acid. Marcus was staring at the blank laptop screen, his trader's mind racing, calculating, and failing to comprehend. His own net worth, which he guarded and boasted about, was a tiny fraction of the number he had just heard. His entire career of slick deals and aggressive posturing was child's play compared to what Julian had accomplished in his quiet office. The toast he had made at the party, mocking Julian as a dreamer, replayed in his head. He had toasted his own idiocy. He had celebrated his own blindness. He felt a wave of nausea. He had built his sense of self on being smarter, quicker, and more successful than everyone else, especially Julian. That foundation had just been vaporized. Julian watched them, his expression unreadable. He felt no triumph, no joy, only a profound, aching sadness. This was the moment he had planned for, the great reversal. But seeing their faces, stripped bare of all their arrogance and pride, gave him no satisfaction. He had wanted to hold up a mirror, and he had, but the reflection was more broken and pathetic than he had imagined. "So," he said, his voice quiet but carrying in the dead silence, "that is the clarity I wish to provide. The narrative of the failed dreamer was, it seems, inaccurate." He began to pack his laptop into its bag, his movements slow and deliberate. Amelia finally found her feet. She stumbled towards him, her hands outstretched. "Julian, I didn't know. I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me?" Her voice was a desperate plea, a frantic search for an excuse, for a way to undo what she had done. Julian stopped what he was doing and looked at her. He truly looked at her. He saw the tears streaming down her face, the genuine shock and regret in her eyes. But it was too late. The regret was for the money, for the status she had misjudged, not for the man she had disrespected. "Tell you?" he asked, his voice laced with a weary incredulity. "I did tell you, Amelia. For 5 years I told you. Every time I said my work was important, I was telling you. Every time I tried to explain what I was doing, I was telling you. Every time I asked you to have a little faith, I was telling you. You just weren't listening. You were listening to them." He gestured with his head towards her family on the sofa. "You chose to believe their definition of worth, not mine. And you certainly weren't listening when you stood in my office, so proud of yourself for shredding my life's work." "I can fix it," she cried, grabbing his arm. Her touch felt alien. "We can fix it. The money, it doesn't have to change anything. It can make things better. For us." "The money changes nothing," Julian said, gently removing her hand from his arm. "And it changes everything. The money is just a number. What's real is what happened in this room today. What's real is the fact that for years, you all treated me with contempt because you thought I had nothing. And the moment you found out I have something, your entire attitude changed. The contempt vanished, replaced by shock, and soon it will be replaced by a fawning, desperate respect. A respect I was never able to earn as a husband, a son-in-law, or a man, but one that I can apparently purchase for $45 million. He zipped his laptop bag. "I don't want that kind of respect. It's as worthless as you thought my papers were." Richard finally spoke, his voice a hoarse croak. "Julian, son, we were wrong. We misjudged you. Terribly." He was trying to sound sincere, but the desperation was transparent. He was already thinking about his failing company, about the salvation this incredible windfall represented. "You are a part of this family, and family helps each other." Julian gave a short, mirthless laugh. "Family, is that what we are? A family doesn't hold a member's worth contingent on their bank balance. A family offers support, not condescension. A family provides a shield. They don't join the firing squad." He looked at Amelia one last time. The chasm between them was now a vast, uncrossable canyon. "The shredder was just a symptom, Amelia. The disease was a lack of faith, a lack of respect. a lack of love. The money can't cure that. I'm not even sure I want it to. He turned and walked towards the grand entryway of the house. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could feel their eyes on him, their minds reeling with the dizzying calculus of loss and opportunity. He walked out of the sterile mansion into the clean, cool air of the late afternoon. He had won. He had settled the account, but he felt a profound and desolate loneliness. He had exposed their poverty of character, but in doing so, he had confirmed the bankruptcy of his own marriage. The game was over, and he had lost the one thing he hadn't even realized he was still fighting for. The weeks that followed the meeting were a study in consequence. The aftershocks of Julian's revelation radiated outwards, fracturing the foundations of the Sterling family. Julian, for his part, moved with quiet efficiency. He checked into a suite at a luxury hotel in the city, a temporary measure while he figured out his next steps. The first thing he did was hire a divorce lawyer, instructing them to be fair but firm. He was not interested in punishment, only in a clean and final separation. Amelia's reaction was a desperate, chaotic flurry of calls, texts, and emails. They swung wildly between tearful apologies, angry accusations, and pathetic pleas for reconciliation. She couldn't seem to grasp that the issue was not the money. In her mind, the money was the solution to everything. "We can travel, Julian," she wrote in one long, rambling email. "We can buy that house by the sea you always talked about. We can do anything. Don't throw this away. Don't throw us away. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but I love you." Julian read the words, "I love you," and felt nothing. Did she love him or the idea of him now? The successful, brilliant man validated by the world. He suspected she didn't even know the difference. Her love was conditional, and the conditions had now been met, but the contract was already void. He instructed his lawyer to handle all communication. For Richard, the consequences were more tangible and immediate. A week after the meeting, swallowing his pride to a degree that was physically painful, he called Julian. He didn't even try to pretend it was a social call. "Julian," he began, his voice strained, "I need your help." He explained the situation with Sterling Corp, the over-leveraged expansion, the poor market response, the looming debt payments he couldn't meet. He was facing ruin. "A loan, Julian, just a loan. $5 million. It would save the company. It would save everything I've built." Julian listened patiently. He thought of the mailroom offer. He thought of the years of being told he wasn't good enough. This was the moment for the moral mirror to show its most brutal reflection. "Let me make sure I understand, Richard," Julian said, his voice calm and analytical. "You are asking me for a $5 million loan to save your company. This after you offered me a minimum wage job sorting your mail and told me I needed to learn humility." Richard was silent. "The answer is no," Julian continued. "Not because I want to see you fail, but because my money was earned through a lifetime of dedicated, focused work. It was earned through integrity and patience. Your financial problems are the result of arrogance and poor judgment. Bailing you out would be a violation of the very principles that allowed me to succeed. It would be bad business." He used their language against them. Business. Principles. It was a checkmate they could understand. Richard hung up without another word. 2 months later, Sterling Corp filed for bankruptcy. The minimalist mansion was put up for sale. Marcus faced his own, more personal reckoning. At his firm, the story of his brother-in-law, the secret genius, began to circulate. The tale of the party, of the toast to the dreamer, became a source of immense amusement for his colleagues and rivals. He became a punchline, just as he had made Julian a punchline. His arrogance, once seen as confidence, was now viewed as foolishness. He had been standing next to a gold mine and had been complaining about the dirt. His judgment was questioned. He lost a key client, then another. His promotion to full partner was quietly put under review. His entire professional identity, built on an image of being the smartest guy in the room, was irrevocably tarnished. Eleanor's downfall was social. The news of Julian's success and the Sterling family's subsequent implosion became the juiciest gossip in their affluent circle. Her friends, who had once envied her perfect life, now spoke of her with pity, the very emotions she had so expertly weaponized against Julian. Her invitations to charity galas dwindled. Her calls went unreturned. She was a pariah, the matriarch of a fallen house. Throughout this, Julian worked closely with Evelyn Reed and the OmniFarm team. He was transitioning his research, overseeing the integration of his data, and consulting on the development of the new drugs. He was energized, fulfilled, surrounded by people who respected his mind and valued his contribution. He was finally in his element. One afternoon, Evelyn asked him to lunch. They sat at a quiet restaurant overlooking the bay. "You've been through quite an ordeal," she said, her gaze direct. "The personal side of things. Are you all right?" "I'm getting there," Julian admitted. "It's strange. You work for something for so long, and you imagine what the success will feel like. I thought it would feel like a victory, but it feels more like a graduation. I'm sad to leave some parts of the past behind, but I know I can't stay." "The money is a powerful catalyst," Evelyn observed, swirling the wine in her glass. "It doesn't change people. It just reveals who they truly are, and at a much higher volume." "It revealed who I was married to," Julian said quietly, "and who I was. I spent years absorbing their judgment, letting it define the terms of my life, even as I resisted it. I was so focused on my work that I didn't realize my marriage had eroded into an empty shell." The divorce was finalized 6 months after the meeting. Julian was generous. He gave Amelia the full value of the guest house, plus a settlement that would allow her to live comfortably, if not lavishly, for the rest of her life. He refused to let her be destitute. That would be playing their game, using money as a weapon. His goal was not revenge, it was peace. He heard through his lawyer that she had taken the money and moved away, to a different city, to start over where no one knew her name or her story. He hoped she would find some measure of happiness, a happiness not tied to status or wealth. With the OmniFarm transition complete, Julian found himself at a crossroads. He had more money than he could ever spend, and the freedom to do anything he wanted. He bought a modest, beautiful home perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific Ocean, a place of solitude and inspiration. He set up a foundation, seeding it with $20 million, dedicated to funding promising but under-resourced independent scientists, the dreamers like him, working in guest houses and garages on world-changing ideas. He became a mentor, a patron, a quiet force for good in the world of science. He found a new purpose, not in the solitary pursuit of discovery, but in empowering others to do the same. One evening, a year after that fateful meeting, he was standing on his deck, watching the sunset over the ocean. The sky was a brilliant canvas of orange and purple. He felt a sense of profound peace he hadn't felt in years. The anger was gone. The hurt had faded to a dull scar. The vindication had been replaced by a quiet wisdom. He thought about worth. Richard and his family had tried to assign him a low value based on their own limited metrics. They had failed to see that true worth isn't something that can be given or taken away by others. It is inherent. It is the sum of your integrity, your passion, your character, your impact on the world. His work had always been valuable, long before OmniFarm wrote a check. The $45 million wasn't the validation of his worth. It was merely a byproduct of it. The Sterling family had lost their fortune, their status, their pride. But Julian knew their real loss was something far greater. They had lost the capacity to see value in anything that couldn't be counted. They were bankrupt in spirit, and that was a poverty from which there was no easy recovery. He had not set out to destroy them. He had only set out to be seen for who he was. The consequences were simply the natural result of their own blindness. Justice, he realized, wasn't always a dramatic act of vengeance. Sometimes it was just the quiet, inevitable balancing of an equation. The world, like science, had a way of seeking equilibrium. And as the last sliver of the sun disappeared below the horizon, Julian Vance, the man who was once a failed dreamer in a guest house, felt truly, immeasurably rich. We hope this story resonated with you. It's a powerful reminder that our value isn't determined by the judgment of others, but by our own integrity, passion, and the quiet work we do when no one is watching. What did you think of Julian's final decision? Was he too lenient, or did he handle it with perfect grace? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective is what makes this community so special. Thank you for being here with us. If you found value in this story, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more content that explores the depths of human nature. Until next time, remember to be kind, have faith in your own worth, and never let anyone else tell you what your dreams are worth.